Part 1. The Cuckoo, 1516. Chapter 1. 2 days before my 10th birthday, my father sold me to the King of England. When my mother shook me awake in the gray December dawn, I was told no more than that we were going on a journey. I wondered why my father would choose to travel in such bitter weather, and my questions only grew as we spent the day on one frozen road after another. The sky was black when we finally arrived at Greenwich, and I was exhausted and near tears. We trudged past the gatehouse through deep drifts of snow. The thin soles of my sister's boots might as well have been paper against the rutted track. By the time we reached our destination, all I could see through swirling flakes was an endless expanse of brick, rising to melt into darkness, and more glass windows than I knew existed. A glow issued from the panes on the ground floor, and higher up, slivers of light escaped tight-closed shutters. The warmth of those windows made the outdoors, layered in shadows, seem barren indeed. A gust of wind slammed into us, and I leaned against my father. It seemed days since Mum had dressed me in my heaviest kirtle and handed us bread and cheese for the journey. I was very hungry. "None of that," he said, his voice gruff. After a long look at the doors, he reached for my hand. "It will be warmer inside." Greenwich Palace was only 5 miles downriver from London, but it was a world away from the mud-choked streets of Southwark and its cramped, squalid houses. I'd tried to take it all in: lofty beamed ceilings, vivid tapestries, scented rushes underfoot. At home, the rushes were changed yearly and didn't smell sweet when new, and I had never seen a tapestry. I stored it up to tell Madeline, whose jealousy would know no bounds when she learned what she'd missed. I didn't understand why we'd left her at home. "May we stop now?" I was weary of trying to match Da's long stride, but he had me firmly by the hand. "Hush, child." He hauled me along until we encountered someone. My father loosed his hold on me and bowed to the man, who glittered in the wavering light of the torches mounted along the walls. They spoke briefly, and then my father bobbed again and reclaimed my hand. I started to ask where we were bound, saw his expression, and sealed my lips. When he looked like that, there was no reaching him. What fretted him, other than the cold and our distance from home? It could not be those things, since he was the one who caused us to make the journey, and surely he knew it was cold. It was Christmas, after all. We stopped before another set of doors, tall and wonderfully carved, with golden handles worked in the shape of dragons. There was a guard outside. I supposed he was a guard, though he was dressed as splendidly as the last man, wearing a green and white striped velvet tunic that was heavy with embroidery. And he asked what business we had within. I tried to listen to their conversation, but my ears caught the strains of music inside, and I was lost. "Take yourselves in," he said, and swung the door wide. "You'll see him. Whether he will see you, I cannot say." I still knew not whom we were there to see, and I grew even more stupid on entering the chamber. It was immense, far larger than our house, larger than the inn where I delivered Mum's washing, larger even than the church where I dozed and shivered on Sundays. Many times larger, and like the men in the passage, it seemed to shimmer with a light of its own. There were tapestries on every wall, worked with fantastic figures and beasts for which I had no name. Candlelight gleamed off silver and gold plate. "Come along," my father said, prodding me. The chamber was full of people. I noticed then, men and women dressed in colors and fabrics far grander than the men in the corridor. I'd fallen into one of Madeline's tales. People like this did not exist. Something in their grandeur frightened me, and I tried to turn away, but Da towed me forward, and the crowd parted. They were staring, their eyes hard and shiny as the diamonds on their sleeves. I'm certain they wondered, as I did, what we were doing in their midst. They appeared unwilling to come too close, and we continued until my father halted so abruptly that my split soles skidded, and I sat down hard on the floor. Silk rustled as the nearest ladies whisked their skirts away. Embarrassment was new to me, but it was easy to see we were horribly inferior to these people. It seemed best to remain invisible, so I crouched on the floor, watching my father straighten and take a deep, shaky breath. A tug on my hand made me scramble up, and I caught Dad's annoyed glance. I hoped that by the time we got home, he would forget to tell Mum, and I might avoid a thrashing. My father spoke now, his stumbling words directed upwards. I forced myself to follow his gaze and nearly folded at the knees again. While my sister told me stories of princes and fair maidens to lull me to sleep, Mum's tales were of another sort. If I misbehaved, she warned, one day a giant would carry me off and eat me, bit by bit, until there was nothing left but bones to pick his teeth. I examined my conscience for a crime that merited the extremity of such a punishment. The giant was immense, and from his bright hair to the tissue-like fabric that made up his costume, he seemed to be fashioned entirely of gold. My eyes fastened on the chain he wore about his shoulders. It was as thick as my wrist. "What have we here?" The giant's voice was deep, a rumble of summer thunder. "Your Majesty," my father stammered, and launched again into the speech he'd been muttering since daybreak. I thought the giant was unkind to make him repeat it, but perhaps he hadn't understood with all the noise. I'd heard it so often during the journey, the words had no meaning. I forced myself to look around as my father spoke. If only Madeline could see these gowns, it would take the glory out of her new sleeves, for cert. The thought gave me a mean pleasure, for it was not often her opinion of herself was brought low, and rarer still, I was the one to do it. The ladies' garments were no more splendid than those of the gentlemen. Aside from the golden giant, I saw men in radiant blues and greens, rich-figured velvets of crimson and black, and everywhere more of that dazzling gold cloth. So many gems glittered around me. It was as if the heavens had scattered themselves upon the room. I noted a young man nearby, dressed all in tawny velvet, with an intricate trimming of pearls and gold thread on his doublet. On his shoulder-length dark hair he wore a matching cap, which sported a yellow gem, big as a bird's egg. His eyes met mine for a moment. Unlike the others, he actually seemed to see me. I began to feel safe despite my surroundings. Who, after all, would notice a child in a place like this? My mother's instructions were that children, especially female children, should remain silent. I felt no larger than a moth among all these flickering candles. "God's teeth, she's filthy!" The giant leaned forward in his chair. Jewels flashed and shimmered when he moved. He was a veritable rainbow. Thus spoken to, it seemed I must look at him. For all his size and magnificence, his shining pink face appeared kindly. I gave him a tentative smile, thinking of Mum and the rough scrubbing she had given me at dawn. I wasn't clean enough for the giant. Perhaps he wouldn't want me after all. "So she sings," he said, rising and placing broad hands on his hips. Rings sparkled on nearly every finger. "We would hear her." My father knelt. "He wants you to sing." Sing? My heart thumped in my chest. I concentrated on a grease spot on my father's gray hose to keep from shaking. "I'm scared," I whispered, then dropped to my knees when he clouded my ear in a perfect imitation of Mum. My father's hand rested on my shoulder, and his fingers tightened as my silence persisted. It mattered so much to him that I sing, and I could not. I let the music filter into my consciousness again. It showed the depth of my fear that I had ever lost it. It was wonderful, like a river, bewildering me with torrents of sound. My mouth opened and shut, but my throat produced no sound. It was almost as if I'd forgotten how. Your Grace, may I? A boy threaded his way through the crowd and offered himself with a bow. Perhaps she needs a song. The giant considered this, dropping back into his intricately wrought golden chair. Then play for her, Tom. This boy had the giant's favor. He grinned at me through unshorn hair, the color of straw, and began to lightly pluck the strings of his instrument, bringing forth an age-old tune known to everyone. Look at me, he said under the music. Don't be feared. With his smile to give me courage, it was easy to mouth the gay lyric and pretend I was singing to him instead of these strange and brilliant people. The minstrels in the gallery ceased their song and took up the air the boy played for me. I cared not for the scrutiny of the shining courtiers now. I didn't even care if they listened. I sang, and the thing inside me that was my voice washed away my fear and made me all but insensible to the jeweled mob standing hushed around me. The cuckoo, she's a merry bird. She sings as she flies. She brings us glad tidings and tells us no lies. She sucks the white flowers for to keep her voice clear, and when she sings, cuckoo, don't the summer draw near. I will rise up and meet him as the evening draws nigh. I will meet him as the evening draws nigh. My voice spiraled up and out, filling the chamber, stirring the pennons suspended from the gilded ceiling. Like the flowers in your garden, when their beauty's all gone, can't you see what I've come to by your loving that one? Oh, the grave she will rot you, she will turn you to dust. There's not one man out of 20 that a young girl can trust. The song was over. I sought the boy's face. He jerked his head and I looked up. The giant's expression was stern. I remembered the curtsy my sister taught me and cautiously tried it. He smiled then, by all appearances delighted. I looked from him to my father, wondering why Da brought me all this way to sing when I was punished nearly every day for wasting time with music. She shows much promise, he said. We will have her. He waved a hand at one of the men by his side. Richard, take this fellow out and give him what he asks. The hand waved again, this time in the boy's direction. Tom, take the child to Cornish. He'll know what to do with her. Mayhap a bath, your grace, Tom said. There were a few snickers. I glared at him, and the laughter grew louder. My father patted my head, picking at my snarled hair in a belated effort to make me presentable. Goodbye, child. I'll give your love to Mom and Madeline. Until that moment, I hadn't understood that he was leaving without me. I wrenched away from Tom, my mud-covered skirts flying. No! Bending swiftly down, he spoke in my ear. 'Tis for the best. Be a good girl, and do as they ask. Sobbing, I caught at the hem of his cloak, but Tom peeled my fingers loose. I wiped my tears with one hand, and with the other fetched him a blow similar to the one bestowed by my father only minutes earlier. He yelped and staggered back. I swung again, but this time he was wary, catching my wrists in square brown hands. The chamber came to life, the courtiers' laughter echoing off the walls. I stood quietly, enduring their mirth, watching my father retreat through the crowd. He did not look back. When the doors closed, my shoulders drooped with despair and fatigue. Now, little one, came that jovial voice so far above me. Tell us your name. His palm stopped just short of touching my hair. Bethan, I said, trying hard not to snivel. He was tremendous on his feet. I found myself at eye level with the padded and pearl-encrusted codpiece that jutted out like a bizarre jeweled egg. That was my lady mother's name. Emotion softened his voice, and I forgave the pearls, though I wondered what sort of man decorated his cod. Mum never said anything about kindly giants. Perhaps she knew nothing about this variety. More likely, I thought, she knew and never told. I held tight to Tom's hand. Kind or terrible, I needed to know what was to become of me. Are you really a giant? My voice, strained from singing after hours in the cold, was barely audible. But I knew he heard me by the flash in his eyes. His laugh boomed out. With a flick of his hand, he gestured for Tom to raise me up. The boy lifted me under the arms, holding me so we were almost the same height. I'm not a giant, Elizabeth, he said, and this time he did touch me, laying one finger lightly on my chin. I'm your king.